Welcome back to Proxammer, everybody. And today we're going to be re-looking at the Craftworld Eldar Swift Strikes far-flung Craftworld trait. It's something that in a previous video I actually made a mistake on in the video, and I basically found out I was explaining it wrong as the rules were written. So what we're going to be looking at today is the Craftworld Eldar Swift Strikes rabbit hole. I actually did some research on this, and I found out that, well, basically, the Swift Strikes dilemma went way farther than I actually ever thought it was going to go. Especially within the Craftworld Eldar community, there's a lot of disagreements and a lot of confusion about how the rule actually works and when and where does it actually apply. So we're going to be looking at how it actually works in the game. So a quick overview of this video, we're going to be looking at the Swift Strikes far-flung Craftworld trait just to give us an idea again and a reminder of what it is and what it does. We're going to be looking at two different interpretations of it, the rules as written or raw, and the rules as interpreted or intended, and what each one allows you to do. And we're also going to be looking at the WTC tournament ruling regarding Swift Strikes and Battle Focus, which apparently you can do both of in one turn according to the tournament ruling, and which ruling you should go with and why. And basically, why GW needs to clarify this either with an FAQ or a RATA to basically solve the issue. So looking at Swift Strikes reads, in your shooting phase, each time a unit with this attribute is selected to shoot, unless that unit fell back this turn, until the end of the phase, it counts as remained stationary. So it counts as having remained stationary. So this looks easy enough to understand, right? But of course, this is GW we're talking about. So currently, with the rules as written, units that advance are not eligible to shoot heavy weapons in the first place. So that means that this trait, as the rules are currently written, would never go into effect and seems largely useless on a vast majority of the army. Remember, a lot of our units already have battle focus, which basically negates the penalty to advancing and shooting with heavy weapons and pistols. So unlike other factions, we don't really suffer the effects of this. So Swift Strikes immediately, as the rules are written, seems like a pretty lame Craftworld trait. So let's actually dive into why this seems so. When we look at the core rule states this for shooting. Start your shooting phase by selecting one eligible unit from your army to shoot with. An eligible unit is one that has one or more models equipped with ranged weapons. Okay, no kidding, right? Units that advance this turn and units that fell back this turn are not eligible. If you have no eligible units, then your shooting phase ends. So what this basically means is that units that advance are not eligible to be selected to shoot unless they are using pistols or assault weapons, which both can be shot after advancing. Therefore, because the unit cannot be selected in the first place, Swift Strikes never activates, which means that you cannot advance and shoot heavy weapons with Swift Strikes, because normally advancing with heavy weapons means that you cannot shoot them under any circumstances because they're not eligible to shoot in the first place. So unfortunately, this is going to put a damper on a lot of the cool things that you could possibly have done with Swift Strikes. However, there is a loophole in the rules as written, which states, if a unit contains at least one model with a pistol or assault weapon, then they are technically eligible to be selected to shoot with those weapons. Swift Strikes, as a result, can be activated, which allows the entire unit to count as having remained stationary, which means, of course, that heavy weapons can now properly shoot after advancing. I know what you guys are thinking with this. This is some sort of gimmicky rules exploit that tournament players use to gain an unfair advantage in their games, right? And in a way, it kind of is. It is an exploit basically for a rule that was already very poorly written, which is the Swift Strikes far-flung Craftworld trait, in comparison with the core rules in the rulebook, right? Because they don't seem to match together very well. However, it is the case that because if your unit has an eligible weapon to shoot, then that unit would be eligible, and therefore Swift Strikes would take effect. And because Swift Strikes takes effect, it means that you can actually advance and fire heavy weapons while doing so. So what are a few of the units that benefit from this loophole? Shroud Runners, right? Shroud Runners can move, advance their full 6 inches with their Ride the Wind ability, and they can shoot their heavy weapons because they have pistols. Now, this means they do not have to actually shoot their pistols. It means they are eligible to shoot, which means that they can actually just choose to shoot other weapons because they have Swift Strikes. So they can shoot their Ranger long rifles and scatter lasers at full ballistic skill. Wind Riders can also do it, and the only thing you have to do to make Wind Riders eligible is to arm one of the Wind Riders with a single twin shuriken catapult. This makes the entire unit eligible to shoot regardless of whether or not they're carrying heavy weapons. Guardian Defenders as well with a heavy platform can do this. Shining Spears, if the Exarch has a shuriken cannon, can also do this, although the applications of that are a little bit limited in my opinion because Shining Spears do want to charge in. And then lastly, maybe the most important, is that all grav vehicles with a twin shuriken catapult can actually advance their full speed, move, still shoot, and guess what? If they have vectored engines, they can also activate their vectored engines for a once-a-use game opportunity. So grav vehicles can also benefit from the Swift Strikes loophole. Now, here's what I got wrong in my previous video, which was units that don't benefit from this loophole are as follows. Dark Reapers, because they have no assault weapons, therefore cannot advance and shoot because they wouldn't normally be eligible to shoot if they had done so, having no pistols or assault weapons. However, just to note, Dark Reapers can still move with this ability and not suffer the -1 to hit. Warwalkers are another option that I stated as being one of the best units with Swift Strikes. I have now reconsidered that. Warwalkers are probably not the best unit with Swift Strikes because, simply put, they're not eligible to shoot in a turn which they advance, and because they don't have battle focus, they don't really get that either. And just basically any unit with heavy weapons with no access to assault weapons or pistols is going to be a unit that doesn't benefit from this loophole. However, having said all that about the rules as written, obviously this is not what GW intended with the rule, right? GW, if anything, has created a policy of closing weird loopholes. Take in, for example, the recent changes they made to obscuring terrain and engagement range. They added that in there to get rid of a loophole, but in doing so created probably a couple of other loopholes that they quickly had to remove. So in general, even though GW often creates these things and steps in these piles of crap for themselves, they often try to backtrack quickly and use a lot of soap. However, in this case, well, quite frankly, they haven't done so. They haven't touched Swift Strikes at all as of yet. However, because of the fact that there's been so much confusion in the Craftworld Eldar community about this, I would think that they would have changed it by now. But here's basically what I think GW intended with this. And we can kind of see this in the part where we read rules that count as remaining stationary. Now, this is part of the additional rule set, the more advanced rules that GW put out. And basically, the first part of this outlines what remaining stationary means and how it should be applied. And what it says is this: such rules that count as remaining stationary apply in the shooting phase, or I should say if they apply in the shooting phase, mean that a unit is eligible to shoot even if it has advanced or fallen back this turn. Okay, so by this interpretation, we can definitely say that Swift Strikes was intended to be used when you advance. So you move, you advance in that turn, and then Swift Strikes activates, which allows you to fire heavy weapons. Because normally advancing would mean that you are not eligible to fire weapons, right? Regardless of what they are, whether they're heavy or rapid fire or whatever. Now, having said that, this is not the way the actual rule is written. This is just a guideline of how to apply rules like this. So technically, if you're a very competitive player and you're playing in the tournament scenes, or you just like to play by certain strict rules, these interpreted meanings will mean little to you, and in fact, you just wouldn't be able to apply this to Swift strikes. And without the WTC ruling and loophole, there would really be little advantage to taking Swift strikes outside of a few units. And going on from that, if you look at Swift strikes and what it's really meant to do, it's really meant to replace sentence 3 in the core rules, which states units that advance this turn and units that fell back are not eligible. So what Swift strikes really is meant to do is say only units that fell back are not eligible to be basically the selection of your shooting. So they should be able to effectively advance and still shoot because they count as being stationary. Now, the other additional piece of information that a lot of us are missing here is that the WTC tournament ruling regarding Swift strikes basically said this: you can advance and use battle focus in the same turn because Swift strikes counts your unit as being stationary. Therefore, it counts as not moving or advancing in the shooting phase as long as the unit was eligible to shoot in the first place, which means you can use battle focus. So if we take a look at the WTC tournament FAQ point number 10 under the Craftworld Eldar section, we will see that Swift strikes allows you to advance and battle focus. However, just remember that for battle focus to take effect, attacks have to be made. You can't just attack nothing and then battle focus away. You actually have to be in range of a target and make attacks against that target to be able to battle focus away afterward. So, the real question becomes, what ruling should you go with? The rules as they are directly written, which are obviously not intended, but that's how they're written, or the rules as intended or interpreted, which is basically how GW wanted it to work. Well, I would say that if you're playing competitively, you should probably stick with the rules as written, unfortunately, even though I don't agree with it, because you will encounter arguments with players all the time who will often nitpick on rules a lot, and honestly, no one has time for that, especially in timed games where you have a time limit. You don't want to be arguing a rule for 20 minutes straight with somebody. You just want to go with whatever's the simplest, and unfortunately, that is the rules as written interpretation. However, if you're playing more casually or even semi-casually in a more calm setting with somebody you know, and you like to apply more common sense to the rules instead of just how they're written, then the rules as interpreted is definitely for you. For example, I would be very tempted to use the rules as interpreted on this on many occasions because quite honestly, you can tell that this is what GW intended with this special rule, right? This Craftworld trait. So again, if you're playing really competitively and you're playing in tournaments and you're preparing for tournaments, I would typically stick with the rules as written until there is a change on GW's part. However, if you're playing in more casual setting, obviously GW intended for the rule to work as intended, right? So depending on what setting you're in is really going to determine which set of rules you are comfortable using. So I'm just going to go on a quick rant really quick about why GW needs to clarify Swift strikes with an FAQ or errata, and basically in general needs to focus more on closing these kind of rules so that they don't cause more confusion. So as it stands, the rules as written is very confusing and allows for a big loophole, which was definitely not intended. Again, putting a single assault weapon in a unit so that it can benefit from Swift strikes is definitely not something I think they intended to do, especially considering their policy of trying to close those kind of loopholes and those kind of rules abuses. But GW has ignored it, even though it's one of the most confusing and poorly worded Craftworld traits. And it really does have an easy FAQ fix. And again, this is something that probably should have been addressed right when the Codex came out, when people were playing in the first tournaments and were confused about it, but it wasn't. So I'm going to help GW out. For all their game designers out there who are writing the rules, I'm going to help you guys out a little bit. Here is an example for you guys of an FAQ entry that you could easily type in, take you a couple of minutes to type it into the FAQ and present it to the Warhammer community. Question: Does the Swift Strike's far-flung Craftworld trait allow units to advance and shoot heavy weapons with no penalty? A. Answer, yes, period. That's it. That's all you guys need to do. It's very simple, right? You guys intended for it to be used this way, obviously, because of the wording on how it's worded and so forth. And obviously you didn't want it to be abused with the inclusion of single pistols or assault weapons in the units. So this is obviously what you guys intended. Just throw it out there in an FAQ, make it more clear for the Craftworld Eldar community. All right, everybody. So in conclusion, I think Swift Strikes is still an amazing Craftworld trait. Either way, rules is written, rules interpreted. I think it's a great Craftworld trait, but it can be a little hard to know how it works and when it actually activates. So GW obviously needs to be much more proactive in seeking out confusing and often conflicting sets of rules like this to change and fix so the players aren't as bewildered when they try to get into a game. And trust me, nothing kills a game faster for a new player than extremely confusing and difficult to understand rules that you basically have to be a farseer to understand. And I know a couple of other YouTube creators and Warhammer players out there have expressed the same thoughts as I do. I know some of you may be listening to this and saying, this is just another rant. I've heard this 100 different times. But really, in the case of Swift Strikes, this needs to be a priority because it's a huge issue at the moment for the Craftworld Eldar community. All right, everybody, that's it for today's video. Thanks for hanging in there with me, and I appreciate the fact of you guys not jumping down my throat too hard about the Swift Strikes mistake I made in the previous video about far-flung Craftworld traits. Really appreciate that, and I also appreciate the, well, quite honestly, good feedback on that trait so that I was able to do a little bit more research on it and present it to you guys in a much more clear and straightforward way. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. I will see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your day. Peace out. And like always, leave some comments in the comment section if you want to add to this. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.